Okay, looking pretty good. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Stacy Levis, and I'm Vice President of Marketing at Prognos Health. I'll be your host for today's webinar. So today our discussion will center around novel approaches to enrich patient journey studies with varied data sources and a particular focus on clinical lab test data. Our presenters today will share their insights on some of the data challenges studying the patient journey, integrating clinical diagnostic insights with other healthcare data sets, and some interesting use cases and demos showcasing these topics. And provided we don't go over, we'll have a Q&A. By the way, if you do have any questions or comments on today's session, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to send us those, and we'll address those as soon as your questions towards the end of the session. And without further ado, I'll let our presenters introduce themselves, and I'll start with Melissa.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Leonhauser. I've been with Prognos for a little over 3 years, focusing on life science product strategy. Throughout my career, I've been working on or supporting the launch of products that use real-world evidence or real-world data, way back even to some of the first source of business offerings. So obviously we've come a long way, and I look forward today to showing you some of the more recent advancements. Vera?
Great. Thanks, Melissa. Hey, everyone. My name is Vera Mucaj, and I head up the implementations team here at Datavant, where I've been for about 3 years as well. Our team consists of technical delivery and life sciences teams, and I've been in the life sciences space for my entire career. I really look forward to the conversation today. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Great, thanks. Vera, I'll let you take it from there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stacy. So we'll be talking about how we can enrich the patient journey, particularly with lab data today. So to get us started, I wanted to set up the stage and a full understanding of the patient journey, that is the patient's experience as he or she goes through the healthcare system, can help manufacturers, physicians, and other stakeholders in ensuring that the patient gets the best care possible. On the pharma side, as brand managers are interested in understanding the full patient journey, there are some questions that may be top of mind, as shown in the schematic slide here. Some of those questions might include: what happens before the patient is actually diagnosed? Where do they go to try to learn more about their disease? Who do they get evaluated by? Is it a primary care physician, a specialist, a combination of multiple caretakers? And how is the problem eventually diagnosed? And importantly, how are clinical decisions around which treatment makes sense get made by the physician and by the patient? And I would say equally importantly, on the patient side, we may want to know, how is the patient complying with the prescribed treatments? And then finally, is the treatment choice made the right choice for that particular patient? Does the treatment work? Did the physician end up switching treatment for that particular patient? What is the outcome in terms of disease progression? And what about quality of life? So fleshing out that patient journey can help brand managers get answers to some key pharma commercial questions. Like, for example, are there patients out there who are brand eligible for which we don't know about? And if a patient is no longer being treated, is it because they switched brands, or because we lost track of them, or did they receive a different diagnosis altogether? So what we'll talk about today is that a lot of these questions can be answered by using healthcare data to build this holistic patient journey. So that being said, having healthcare data power the patient journey is important, but not outright easy. At Datavant, our contention is that it's not that the data doesn't exist. In fact, there's been an exponential growth in healthcare data availability in the past decade. We believe that the challenge is accessing the right data and connecting the data at the patient level. And this is difficult because, as you can appreciate, the healthcare data today exists in a myriad of silos. We think of this as the fragmented data problem, and I'll talk about it a little bit today. You can think about it from your perspective as a patient, right? You have a primary care physician that you might see a couple of times a year, and that physician's office has data about you. A hospitalization event might mean that some data about you is found in yet another electronic health record system. Let's say your physician recommends a lab test and there's key information in those test results that sits in yet another location. Let's say you get a prescription for a specialty drug and there's data on whether that prescription has been filled out or not and whether that prescription has been taken by you as a patient. You use a wearable device, let's say, that measures your step and there's data about you there, and so on and so forth. You get the point. So there's a ton of power in linking these disparate data sources in, I would say, a patient privacy centric matter. And this is helpful in understanding the story of the entire patient journey. And our mission at Datavant is to help empower that data linkage. And we do so by providing privacy preserving technology with the goal of really connecting those disparate health data to ultimately improve patient outcomes. And Datavant solves this fragmentation challenge by helping data users de-identify healthcare data and connect that data at the patient level. So if we go to the next slide, over the past few years, Datavant has built the largest ecosystem of data partners, including claims data, EHR, mortality, pharmacy, socioeconomic data, and of course, as we'll talk about today in detail, a key health data source, which is lab data. Our open ecosystem has over 200 million covered lives and over 100 billion patient records. Ultimately, if you think about it, all of these data types are like puzzle pieces needed to see the full picture of the patient. We really believe that solving this fragmentation problem is key, and then that's what Datavant really concentrates on. But as I mentioned earlier, that's part of the challenge. There's a second challenge to overcome, which is making sure that data is usable and accessible. Or thinking about it another way, having that data be fit for the particular purpose for which it's being used. And for that, as you can imagine, data needs to be standardized, taxonomized, cleaned, what have you, so that it can be used for analytics and research purposes. And Prognos, as Melissa will tell you about in a bit, has focused not only on connecting the lab data, but making it fit for purpose for the use cases that we'll talk through today. So with that said, I'll let Melissa take on and talk about some specific use cases.
Sorry about that. Took me a second there to get off mute. So hi, everybody. As we talked about, and Vera, thank you very much for passing this over. During this section, I want to cover three things. I want to introduce Prognos, explain how we've been helping our customers understand laboratory testing and treatment dynamics. I want to talk about why including laboratory testing is so important when looking at patient journey studies or tracking patients over time. And last, give you a glimpse of our new software, which is Prognos Factor, where we can actually perform a lot of these different analytics related to the patient journey. So who is Prognos? About a decade ago, Prognos identified a need related to laboratory testing. One of our founders is a physician, and he knew just how often physicians were relying on laboratory testing to monitor a patient's health or to help guide treatment decisions. But that life science companies and other stakeholders were blind to those insights. And there's a couple of reasons why they were blind to them. So through claims data and data that was readily available, you could see that a laboratory test had been given, but you don't see the results. And if somebody did want to get, the actual lab results, it was often difficult to do so. So laboratory testing can be fragmented, and not all labs are willing to provide their information. And lastly, it was difficult because even if a pharma company could get their hands on laboratory testing data, it's really difficult to work with. And sort of rightfully so if we think about the origin of the data and its purpose. So for claims data, for instance, the purpose of that data is for payment. So somebody is submitting the claim to get reimbursed. And so it's read typically by, a machine or a computer. It's on a standard form. And it's typically pretty complete and accurate, or somebody wouldn't get paid for it. Now, lab data, on the other hand, is used for a provider to read, right? It just needed to be in a format that was useful to the provider, that they would be able to interpret and understand the results. And so what we find is that laboratories use all different formats for that type of reporting. And even within the same lab system, you'll see that the naming of a test, the units, the reference range, they can all be different, even if it's the same test that's been given. So we've really spent a lot of time building up technologies and expertise to be able to make that data usable and valuable. So if you look at the graphic here, it does a good job of explaining that process or what Prognos does. So all the way over to the left, you'll see what we call the data ecosystem, where we have the laboratory test, not so secretly represented here by little hairballs, right? Because they're quite messy, and then some other data points. And we take that data and we integrate it, we store it, we improve it, and we interpret it. Like I said, using different technologies and using our expertise. And in the end, for years we've been creating solutions using that data. And now more recently, we're trying to put that power into our customers' hands through our Prognos software, our Prognos Vector software. So over the next couple slides, I hope to give you an idea of that software itself, so you can see it in action. So why is lab data so important, right? I told you it was, but why? I want you to really understand why I say that. So a recent study found that about 70% of treatment decisions are influenced by lab test results. And that's really because physicians and other providers are using laboratory testing in a number of ways. First, they use it to confirm or rule out a suspected diagnosis. So again, imagine yourself as a patient. You've been feeling very tired. You go into your primary care physician, and they know that there are a number of things that could cause fatigue. So one of the steps they may take is sending you for blood work, right, where you'll have your CBCs or your general chemistries and a host of other tests done. And the physician is looking to those tests to help identify, what's going on and what's causing your fatigue. So you'll see that in the very early in some patient journeys that lab testing is being done to help diagnose the patient. Laboratory testing is also done to identify the right therapy. So for categories where there are targeted therapies available, oftentimes it's a lab test that helps identify if the patient has or doesn't have the biomarker, geared towards the targeted therapy. So there's quite a few of these in oncology, some other categories, but one to think about might be non-small cell lung cancer. There are targeted therapies for different gene mutations that are seen in that cancer. So you may get tested for EGFR or ROS1 or ALK. And depending on the result, then the physician knows, well, which therapy class makes the most sense to treat with. Laboratory testing is also used to monitor a patient's disease over time. So a physician wants to make sure that the therapy, whether that's drug or not, is working for the patient. And so, a lot of categories have a test that would indicate, yep, disease is controlled, or maybe it's not controlled and the patient is progressing, or there's a relapse. So that's pretty common. Again, another example in this sense would be if you had high cholesterol, right? If you have hyperlipidemia, your physician is likely sending you to have your LDL checked multiple times a year. And last, and probably the least frequent, but still important, use of laboratory testing is to look at if a patient is tolerating therapy well. So for some drugs, they may impact other parts of the body. So maybe a kidney or liver function test is given to make sure that the patient is tolerating the current therapy. So if we think about that, right, and I believe at this point, hopefully I've proven that laboratory test is used a lot by physicians, but also how does that play if it's not within your patient journey analytic or study? So I have a good example of what's missing if you don't have lab data included. So this is just for one patient who has multiple myeloma. And we can see that in February 2017, they were diagnosed for the first time. And this is using all available claims data. So we looked at pharmacy and medical claims data for this patient. And most of it is coming off of the medical claims. But right now this is without lab. So we see the patient has been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and we see that they're given treatment shortly thereafter, right? And then we see a couple of visits with their physician over time. And then, about a year later, in February 2018, we see another treatment start, and this time for a different therapy. Without the lab data, we don't know why the patient is starting therapy again or why it's changed. But when we add the lab data into the patient journey, it becomes really clear. So within multiple myeloma, patients are typically go for M protein test, where their M protein is measured as a way to monitor the disease. So if you look at, this patient had a number of tests over the months where their M protein level was low. And then come January 2018, and we see what's called an M spike, where the M protein level is much higher, which would indicate that the patient is relapsed, which is really the explanation here in this patient journey for why the physician has chosen to start therapy back up and change therapy. Okay, so this is really, why you want to include lab data in a patient journey study. It really helps explain the why, why were certain events happening. So the next couple slides, I'm actually going to show you different analytics typically done as part of a patient journey study and how lab data can play a role in them. And like I said, I'm going to toggle a little bit here from the slides to our Prognos Factor software to show you some real live data as we're talking these through. So when starting a patient journey or an outcome study, one of the very first things that you do is identify the cohort of patients that you want to look at, right? What is that patient population that you want to study? And lab data can be really helpful here because it helps make sure that the patient population you're looking at is specific enough, right? Particularly if you have a targeted therapy or you're used at a certain part in the patient journey that the lab data would help identify. So the cohort that we're looking at here is patients with lung cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, who are EGFR positive. They have the EGFR gene mutation. And there are a number of therapies that are approved for this particular patient group. So I'm going to kick this one off to start running a market share. But really to get to the point of why you want to make sure that this is included in the cohort definition is if you didn't have the laboratory test, all you would know is that the patient had lung cancer, right? So if you only had ICD codes, you would know that they had lung cancer. And actually, there's not even an ICD code for non-small cell lung cancer. But using an EGFR test to help refine helps with that as well, as there isn't any targeted therapies for other lung cancers. So we can make the assumption that if the provider's testing them for EGFR to start with, that they have non-small cell lung cancer. So if we take a look at the results, we can see that Tagrisso and Tarceva are the two most common of those targeted therapies to be used among this group of patients, right? This particular cohort. So again, if we're the brand manager for one of these therapies, this is much more helpful to us than looking at the total patient population of all patients with lung cancer, which is where you'd be if you didn't have the lab data available or used within the patient study. The other piece that you might want to study or look at if you have a targeted therapy is, well, what % of patients in this cohort are actually given targeted therapies? So I have that running now. And what we're looking at is, if you can see how I have this set, is what % of patients who had that EGFR positive test received one of those targeted therapies within 6 months. And I chose to include segments here by age, just to see if we might see some differences in the results. And we do. So patients, this younger population of patients, those under 60, are more often getting a targeted therapy within those 6 months after the positive EGFR test than some of the older patients. The next example I'm gonna talk through is about the number of tests, right? So testing can be a touch point with providers, and also just to understand, how patients are getting healthcare, to know how often they're being monitored is a key insight. And like I said, there's a number of categories where monitoring testing is a main way that laboratory testing is used. So here we're going to look at prostate cancer patients. And typically prostate cancer patients are tested for prostate-specific antigens, or a PSA test, to monitor for disease progression. So if a physician saw, an elevated a level of PSA, they would know that they need to take action. So here we're going to look at how many PSA tests were given in a year among these patients that were, among this group of patients with prostate cancer. I think my system timed out for a second, so just give me 1 second here. Okay. So again, PSA, 1 year after, we're going to hit analyze, and we get a distribution chart. So within this distribution chart, we can see that about 46% of patients were tested 1 time within the year, 24% were tested twice, about 14% 3 times, and about 6% 4 times. And that sort of ties in with the next example that I'm going to talk through. And this is something that Prognos actually handles a lot. So we have another line of products or offerings that are alerts that can tell pharmaceutical companies, hey, a physician is receiving a lab test result that might indicate that a treatment decision is coming, right? And so with those alerts, pharmaceutical companies can then go educate the appropriate physicians. But one of the questions we get is, well, how much time is there to get in there and intervene, right? How much time is there between the lab test result, the abnormal, or really any lab test result, and the start of treatment? And so that's what this example is. This example is going to show for patients that have asthma or severe asthma that they may receive an eosinophil test if the result is over 300, that would indicate a high level of eosinophils or an elevated level. So we're going to look at what percent or how much time after that test, that eosinophil test of 300 or more, does the patient get the biologic therapy? And I'm going to actually look at it by different comorbidities. And as this is analyzing, I'm just going to talk for a second about biologics. So biologics in this market are typically used later. It's a later line of therapy. So not every patient gets to a biologic. But for those that do, this is showing just how much time has elapsed from the elevated eosinophil test results to one of those biologic therapy starts. So what the results here is showing that patients, these severe asthma patients who also have allergic rhinitis, it takes about 29 days from the test to the therapy start. And those without allergic rhinitis, it takes about 34 days. So in this case, there's enough time there to intervene and be able to educate the physician. And you can look at other measures of time as well. How much time between diagnosis and test, or diagnosis, test, and then therapy, right? There's a number of time measures that are typically done within a patient journey study. And the last example I want to walk through is adherence. So I think, we can make some assumptions that patients with poor test results are likely less adherent, right? So either the medicine's not working, and so they have a poor test result, and the physician makes a change, or maybe they stopped their therapy and then they had the poor test result. But the thing is that, you know, assumptions are one thing. Being able to quantify that result is better, obviously. So here we're going to look at the diabetes market and focus in on one particular drug. We'll look at Trulicity, which is a GLP-1 therapy that's used for anti-diabetic purposes. And we'll look and see how the lab test results impact the compliance and persistence. Both of them will calculate at the same time. So a test that diabetics receive an HbA1c test, again, is typically done a few times a year to see if their diabetes is controlled. And there's a range of results with, you know, 7 being considered controlled, 7 or below being considered controlled, and 9 and above being uncontrolled, with a few in between. So we're going to take a look and see, for those patients who had an HbA1c test within the first 6 months of this observation period, did it impact their persistence and compliance to Trulicity? And so looking at compliance here up top, and compliance is basically related to how many days supply the patient was given over, in this case, we're looking at a year. You can see that the patients with the better HbA1c results of 7, where they're considered controlled, have better compliance, right? And those with a 9, which is considered uncontrolled, have the lowest number of days, or they're the least compliance. The same can be seen among persistence. And this is actually pretty clear. When we look at these persistence curves, the yellow line, the least persistent group, are those that have the HbA1c of 9 or above, and the most persistent group are the patients that are controlled. So this really helps back up any assumptions that are made, and we could go and change some of the assumptions that I have in there. Instead of looking within the first 6 months, we could look in the first 3 months, for instance, and see how that impacts adherence as well. So throughout those examples, I've really talked about how laboratory data being linked with open claim sets can work, right? So most of the examples I showed were combinations of Prognos' lab data with medical claims and pharmacy claims. But it can be linked with other things as well, just based on, you know, the business question that you're trying to answer, or some of the metrics that you need to include. So just a few examples here of other things that lab data could be linked with using Datavant technology would be closed claims. So closed claims are still pharmacy and medical claims data, but instead of them being open, meaning they could be from, you may not be getting every one of a patient's claims. A closed claim set, typically from a payer, is what is considered closed. So if you're trying to do an outcome study, or you want to make sure that you have a high level of statistical confidence, you'll want to link the lab data with a closed claim set. You may want to link lab data with EMR or registry data if you're looking for some metrics that aren't readily available in claims data, right? So in EMR, you may be able to get the stage of the cancer, blood pressure, BMI, weight, other things. And from the registry data, you may be able to get some self-reported outcomes or other characteristics of the patient's disease. So you would link those together if you wanted, you know, what we're sort of calling elusive metrics, or metrics that are more difficult to get a hold of. And the last example I have here is being able to link lab data with data that you have. So if you have a patient support program or other program where you have information on patients, and you want to look at, okay, is the patient journey of patients that we're supporting look different from the general population? We could put together the patients in that program plus claims data and laboratory data, and maybe look at adherence or look at outcomes if the outcome could be measured in lab data, for instance. So we actually have a related poll question that Vera is going to take us through.
Great, thank you, Melissa, for that informative presentation. So now we'd like to pose a question to everyone in the audience here. The question is, what data sets are you interested in linking with this lab data? And there's going to be a Zoom poll that will be on your screen. And the options that we put here are pharmacy, medical claims data, closed claims data sets, patient support or hub data, EHR data, all of the above or other. If you're interested, if you're clicking on other, we'd love to know in the comments section what other data you're interested in. And we'll give folks a few seconds here to respond. Great. Thanks for participating, everyone. I see that we have a very enthusiastic group today. All of the above takes up the majority. Totally agreed. Connecting as much lab and other data together will really give you a more holistic view of the journey. And then I see that across other data sets, EMR data and various forms of claims data are getting equal choices here. Fantastic. Well, thanks for submitting that poll. Actually, that is pretty consistent with what we're hearing whenever we're talking to our partners in the ecosystem. And in particular, when we talk to life sciences professionals, there's keen interest in linking disparate data sources together, of course, but if we go to the next slide, there's this keen interest in bringing external data sources, like some of the ones that we've mentioned here, labs, claims, CHR, et cetera, to link to your internal data sets, such as patient support program data, registries, or specialty pharmacy data, and really linking these external to internal or somewhat proprietary data can help really build those insights that answer the questions that we posed at the beginning of this conversation. So to summarize what we talked about today, we hope we've given you some ideas on why having this enriched patient journey with connected, fit-for-purpose data is helpful. And also we hope that we've given you some ideas on how you can use technology to herd data together in a meaningful way. And importantly, how lab data in particular is a key component to that holistic patient journey.
That's great. Thank you, Vera, and thank you, Melissa, and to our participants who answered the poll. We'll open it up now to take some questions. There were a couple in our Q&A. Someone just mentioned integrating lab data with lifestyle data. So I'm not sure, I don't think that was an option, but that's something that both companies can consider in patient journey studies. So we're going to open it up for questions. I'll give it a second. If you'd rather just type them in. I don't know if our mission control is going to open it up for people to ask questions live. Or whether, oh, there we go. Okay, will you be sharing the slides? Yes, we will. Actually, we will be sharing the slides and the recording as well in a follow-up. And we're happy to take more questions, via email, but these will definitely be shared with the group, and we'll have the contact info in there as well, and we'll follow up with everyone. And to those, of course, who couldn't make the webinar today. Okay, the other question is, what is a typical brand manager action following this data? So I'll let Melissa.
Happy to jump in. So that's a great question. So one, a lot of times, some of these patient journey studies are done pre-launch so that you have an idea of of your market size, right? How big is the population of patients that you can help? Once in launch, a lot of times they're used to help with tactics, right? So I talked a little bit about having an alert. So if you know that laboratory testing is an indicator of a treatment decision, you may use an alert that a laboratory test has just occurred, to send in a rep or send an email or take it, whatever tactic you want to use for promotional education purposes. Some other ways that a brand manager may use it, if there's a category where where lab testing is really important, you may want to take a look at which physicians are doing testing and for what % of their patients are they doing it, and see if those are things that you can impact. So for instance, for a new oncology product that maybe has a biomarker where there's no other targeted therapies, one of the main strategies is actually to increase testing of that biomarker, of that gene mutation. So you can take a look at what's a physician list of patients that are treating, physician list of physicians who are treating that tumor type, and then see, okay, what % are they testing? And then see if you're able to increase it. We actually helped a customer fairly recently who had a similar situation, and we looked at new biomarkers as paths to follow, right? So how did they do? What can I expect as an uptake of a new test?
Okay, great. Another question. Okay, they're kind of coming in fast and furious. So, okay, does this type of study require IRB approval or patient consent?
One of these patient journey studies?
Yes.
Yeah, so no, so these patients are de-identified using the Datavant technology. I think some of the sources we talked about, maybe linking with, those would have patient consent, maybe for the patient support program or something like that. But the main examples that I've walked through, no, you do not need to be opted in or something like that, if that's what the question's getting at. We de-identify the patients and their identities are protected the whole time.
Great. So another question, and this is a good one. So, and I think this kind of harkens back to our slide on our platform and the integration and harmonization, but asking basically if we also provide data management services like MDM, CDW, data aggregations. So if this person were to have a commercial infrastructure set up and just need to add lab data, can we do that? So just basically helping them set up the infrastructure to ingest the lab data.
Yeah, most definitely. So I think that's probably a bigger conversation we can have as to what level of assistance. We can do anything from just providing the record level data to helping through APIs and other technologies, making sure that the lab data is brought in and integrated with your other data. So please reach out to me afterwards, and we can talk a little bit more about all the capabilities there. But it's a pretty wide range of ways we can help.
Okay, great. And another question has to do with the speed of delivery. So in other words, the latency. What is the latency of the lab data after the QC is performed for delivery?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's actually a great question, and one that didn't come up because not always does patient journey rely on something being extremely, extremely timely. But the lab data is delivered to us over the weekend each week. So we will receive the data on Saturdays and Sundays and deliver on Wednesday of that week. So typically it's 5 to 11 days after the test has resulted.
Okay, and there's another one. What is the process and timing for using Datavant's technology to link to Prognos?
Great, so I can take that. So Prognos already uses Datavant technology to de-identify their lab data sources. So the process for being able to use it on data recipient's end is very simple and straightforward, given that on the Prognos side we're already installed, and the installation itself for anybody else who's interested in de-identifying and generating data and patient keys is super simple and straightforward. We can have that whole process done end to end in a couple of days for you.
Great. A couple of other questions that might have answers like it depends. So I'm going to, we'll probably answer those questions after the webinar, being cognizant of people's time. Another question is, what are the advantages of using Datavant in terms of patient overlap percentage versus another data linking vendor?
Sure.
One for you, Vera.
Happy to answer that as well. So I think I alluded to this a little bit in the presentation, but Datavant has partnered with tons and tons of different data sources and data recipients right now. And in doing so, we've been able to build the largest healthcare data ecosystem right now. So if there's a particular type of data that you're interested in, someone in our ecosystem, someone who's already generated the Datavant patient keys already has it. Datavant also provides what we call an overlap tool or an overlap system, where you can look at your own data and a data set that you're interested in licensing and do a 30-second overlap to be able to see the number of records that your data set and their data set have in common before you've even made the decision to license that data set.
Great. And I think the final one that we have is, and this one is probably, Melissa, for you, but I think it would take about an hour to answer, but it's what types of analytics can we do with all of this integrated data? And, I would imagine that question could go on and on, but if, Melissa, you want to touch on any of those, great. If not, we can certainly follow up with this attendee after the webinar.
Yeah, no, definitely happy to do that because we really did just look at a quick snapshot of just a few analytics related to patient journey. There are other study types. We're actually building out applications for outcomes, for physician segmentation, for clinical trial site identification, and others. So, we have some in mind, but it really isn't limited. Anything that you can do with real world data, lab data can play a part in. So I'm definitely happy to take that one offline and talk a little bit more specifically.
Okay, one more that's in here. It's for Vera. Does the Datavant team perform medical coding of the data, or is it expected that pre-coded data from different sources are in the ecosystem? It might be for you, Melissa, too.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. I'll give the overall overview on the Datavant side. So our strategy and our focus as a company is to build the pipes so that folks can exchange data with each other and they can connect data and really remove the friction around healthcare data exchange. When it comes to data analytics or data cleaning or any other data manipulation, that is done by our ecosystem, by our customers, by our partners, such as Prognos. So that is outside of the remit of what Datavant does.
Right, and I'll just add, it's not coding per se, but there is a lot of work to make sure that the laboratory data can be interpreted and the results, easy to understand. So, for instance, I think on my one slide I showed that we do natural language processing. We use other machine learning to do that. So to Vera's point, Datavant doesn't do that work. It's making sure that you're partnering with the right sources, the right companies, so that you don't have to take that on yourselves.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have time for today. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us and being engaged. And thank you to Melissa and Vera for sharing their insights with us. Again, if we weren't able to get to any of your questions today, if you think of others, we'll be following up with you. And we'll make this webinar recording available within the next couple of days. and we'll certainly send out an email to let you know that it is available. We hope you and your families are staying safe, and we want to thank you again for attending. Have a great day.